y'all shot me over the fact that I left over some food, and I was just going out to Burger King to get myself something to eat and come back home. That's insane. I can't believe it. I'm like, how the fuck can y'all just be carefree and y'all took away my life? For real, y'all really took away my whole life. And this is like not fair to me because there's some food that I left out. Some food that I left out. Like, that's insane, bro. That's insane as hell. Like, some food that I left out. Some food. And it was all due to the fact that I didn't want to come home. Like, but I didn't have no money. I was really making money and everything. The folks that shot me took away my ability to enjoy. And y'all doing everything. And it's, I'm trying to live my life. But how can you restrict somebody's breath from to somebody that can help? You see what I'm saying? That doesn't make sense. I should not be signing. I'm like this right now. Y'all don't care. Y'all can't hire for y'all want to. Imagine y'all getting shot. And y'all done can't eat. That's insane. You deserve it.
And I'm trying to be a strong mom. I'm trying to be a strong mom for my kids. I'm trying to be a strong mom for my kids. My husband is all the way. I'm sorry. My husband is all the way in Ohio. I had to leave my husband to come down here. And I know that you all have lives. I know that you all have so many things going on. And I just wanted to say thank you. This is by far the hardest thing that I've ever had to come in my life. While also knowing that my son will never get justice. And it's so difficult. And it's so unfair. But God is in control.
Imagine visiting your own father's home, a place where you should feel safe, a place filled with family memories, and a place where the last thing you expect is to become the victim of a shooting. But on June 21st, 2025, what reportedly began as an ordinary family visit would end with 26-year-old aspiring producer Akil Searcy lying critically wounded inside his father's home. And what makes this story even more disturbing is what allegedly triggered the confrontation. According to reports surrounding the case, it wasn't money, it wasn't a robbery, and it wasn't some long-running criminal dispute. The disagreement reportedly started over something so minor that, when people later heard about it, many struggled to understand how it could possibly have escalated into gunfire. But before that night was over, Akil's life had changed forever. He survived, but the young man who reportedly walked into his father's home would leave facing a devastating new reality. He was reportedly paralyzed from the neck down. And the question people have been asking ever since is painfully simple. How does a disagreement inside a family home escalate to the point where a 26-year-old man ends up fighting for his life? To understand why this case has attracted so much attention, we need to go back to the beginning, because this wasn't supposed to be a dangerous night. There were no reports suggesting that Akil arrived expecting violence. There was no indication that this ordinary family visit would become one of the most traumatic moments of his life. Akil Searcy was just 26 years old. He was described as an aspiring producer, a young man still building his future and pursuing his ambitions. At that age, most people are thinking about careers, relationships, opportunities, plans. and what the next few years of life might bring. But in a matter of moments, all of those plans were thrown into uncertainty. June 21st, 2025. Akil was reportedly inside his father's home when a disagreement began. At first, nothing about the situation apparently suggested that it would become life-threatening. Families disagree. People become irritated. Arguments happen. Sometimes voices get louder. Sometimes somebody walks away angry. Usually, that is where it ends. But this time, it didn't. And this is where the story becomes difficult to comprehend, because the argument was reportedly connected to something incredibly minor. Think about that for a moment. One small disagreement, a few tense words, a situation that could have ended with someone leaving the room. Instead, it allegedly continued escalating. The atmosphere changed. What may have started as frustration became something much more serious. And then came the moment nobody could take back. A firearm became involved. A shot was fired, and Akil was hit. In an instant, everything changed. Whatever people had been arguing about seconds earlier suddenly became meaningless. There was now a 26-year-old man critically wounded inside a home that should have been one of the safest places in his life. The focus shifted from anger to survival, from disagreement to emergency, from words to consequences that could last forever. Akil had been seriously injured. Emergency help was needed. And as the seriousness of his condition became clear, the horrifying reality began to sink in. This wasn't a minor gunshot wound. This wasn't something that could be treated quickly before Akil returned to his normal life. The injuries were devastating. Reports later indicated that Akil had become paralyzed from the neck down. For anyone hearing those words, it is difficult to fully understand what they mean until you imagine the reality behind them. One moment, you are moving independently, walking, using your hands, picking up your phone, opening a door, eating, getting dressed, working toward your career, doing everyday things without thinking twice. Then, suddenly, your body no longer responds the way it did before. Your entire future has changed, and you are only 26. That is one of the reasons this case hits so hard. It isn't only about the shooting itself. It is about everything that came after the bullet. The hospital room, the medical assessments, the conversations no family wants to have, the uncertainty, the fear, and the realization that survival may only be the beginning of a much longer battle. Because surviving a catastrophic shooting does not mean the nightmare automatically ends. In some cases, survival begins an entirely different fight. A fight involving rehabilitation, medical complications, physical therapy, emotional trauma, dependence on caregivers, financial pressure, and adapting to a life that may now look completely different from the one you imagined. For Akil and those close to him, the consequences of that night reportedly extended far beyond June 21st. And yet, one question continued hanging over everything. Why? Why did the situation reach this point? How could something described as minor become violent enough for somebody to be shot? There are moments in true crime cases where the scale of the consequence seems completely disconnected from the event that supposedly triggered it. This appears to be one of those moments. A disagreement should never become a death sentence, and it should never leave someone with life-altering injuries. Yet that is reportedly what happened here. But there is another detail that makes this story especially unsettling. The shooting allegedly happened inside Akil's father's home. Home. That word matters, because when most people think of home, they think of security, familiarity, family, and a place where you lower your guard. You don't normally enter a parent's home thinking you need to protect yourself from life-changing violence. And perhaps that is part of what makes stories involving family conflict so emotionally difficult. The danger doesn't come from a stranger waiting in a dark alley. It happens among people who know one another, people who may have shared meals, celebrations, arguments, memories, and years of history. When violence erupts in that environment, the physical damage is only one part of the destruction. Relationships can be destroyed too. Families can become divided. People begin replaying conversations. Witnesses ask themselves whether the outcome could have been prevented. Someone may think, what if I had stepped in earlier? What if somebody had walked away? What if the argument had ended 5 minutes sooner? What if the gun had never been there? Those questions can remain long after the immediate crisis is over. But there is an important point to remember. Information surrounding violent incidents can change as investigations develop. Different witnesses may remember events differently. Online posts may repeat details that have never been formally confirmed. And once a shocking case begins spreading across social media, speculation can quickly become mixed with fact. That is why this story should not be treated like entertainment, detached from reality. At the center of everything is a real young man who reportedly suffered catastrophic injuries, a real family, and consequences that cannot simply be undone. Akil reportedly survived the shooting, and survival itself matters. Because when someone suffers an injury this serious, every day can become part of a much larger journey. There may be moments of progress, moments of frustration, moments of hope, and moments where the weight of what happened becomes almost impossible to ignore. For someone who is pursuing a future in music or production, even the smallest daily action may now require assistance. Yet ambition does not automatically disappear because the body changes. Dreams do not necessarily vanish because circumstances become harder. But the path toward those dreams can become dramatically more difficult. And that brings us back to the decision that reportedly caused all of this. Not just the argument, but the escalation. Because disagreements happen every day. Millions of people become angry without reaching for a weapon. Millions of families argue and later reconcile. The critical moment is what someone chooses to do with that anger. One decision can last seconds. Its consequences can last decades. And this case is a brutal example of that reality. Imagine rewinding the night, back before the argument, before the tension, before the gunshot. Akil arrives. Everything is still normal. He can move freely. His future still looks the way he expects it to look. There is no hospital bed, no paralysis, no police investigation surrounding the shooting, and no story being discussed by strangers online. Then the disagreement happens, and somewhere between the beginning of that disagreement and the moment the gun is fired, there were likely opportunities for the situation to stop. Someone could have walked away. Someone could have ended the conversation. Someone could have decided that whatever they were angry about simply wasn't worth it. But violence has one terrifying characteristic. Once certain actions are taken, there is no rewind button. You cannot pull a bullet back into a gun. You cannot return everyone to the exact moment before the trigger was pulled. You cannot erase the memory from the people who experienced it. And you cannot guarantee that the person who was shot will ever return to the life they had before. That is why stories like Akil's are bigger than curiosity about a criminal case. They are warnings about escalation, about anger, about firearms, and about how quickly a temporary emotional reaction can create permanent consequences. For Akil, June 21st, 2025, divided life into two parts, before the shooting and after it. Before that night, he was reportedly a 26-year-old aspiring producer pursuing his future. After that night, he reportedly faced one of the most difficult challenges imaginable: paralysis from the neck down. The physical impact is devastating, but there is also the psychological side. Imagine being awake and aware that your life has changed. Imagine remembering exactly what you could do before. Imagine wanting to perform a simple action your body can no longer complete. For many survivors of traumatic injuries, recovery isn't simply medical. There can be grief for the life they once had, fear about the future, anger, depression, determination, hope, and sometimes all of those emotions can exist at the same time. Families are affected too. Someone may suddenly become a full-time caregiver. Homes may need to be modified. Medical equipment may become necessary. Transportation becomes complicated. Care becomes expensive. And every person close to the survivor has to adjust. One bullet can affect far more people than the person it strikes. That is the hidden aftermath of gun violence that crime headlines rarely capture. A headline might say, 26-year-old man shot during family dispute. It takes seconds to read. But behind that sentence could be months of hospital treatment, years of rehabilitation, lost opportunities, changed relationships, medical bills, court proceedings, and emotional wounds that never completely disappear. And all of it allegedly began with something minor. That may be the most haunting part of this case. Because if the disagreement really was as insignificant as reported, then the outcome becomes even harder to accept. No minor argument is worth somebody losing their mobility. No moment of anger is worth destroying multiple lives. No temporary dispute should create permanent suffering. And yet cases like this continue to happen. Sometimes because pride becomes more important than peace. Sometimes because people refuse to walk away. Sometimes because a weapon is available during a moment of intense anger. And sometimes because everyone involved assumes the situation will never go that far, until it does. That final moment before violence is often the moment that matters most. Because after the violence happens, everybody understands how serious the situation is. The challenge is recognizing the danger before the irreversible decision is made. There is also something important about how we consume stories like this online. True crime content has become enormously popular. People watch cases because they want answers. They want to understand behavior that seems impossible to understand. They want to know what happened, who was responsible, why it happened, and what happened afterward. But behind every true crime story are human beings. Akil Searcy is not simply a character in a viral story. According to the reports surrounding this incident, he is a young man whose physical independence was dramatically altered after being shot. That deserves to remain at the center of the story. Not rumors, not internet arguments, and not sensational speculation. The tragedy itself is already powerful enough. As investigations and legal proceedings surrounding incidents like this develop, details may be clarified, challenged, or corrected. That is why it is important to separate confirmed information from allegations. When people rush to fill missing pieces with assumptions, innocent individuals can be wrongly blamed, and the real facts of a case can become harder to identify. What we can focus on is the outcome that has been reported. A family visit, an argument, a shooting, a 26-year-old man critically injured, and a future permanently changed. But Akil's story does not have to end with the moment he was shot. Survival means there are still chapters left to write. Life after catastrophic injury may not look anything like the life that came before, but survivors around the world have continued creating, communicating, building careers, maintaining relationships, and finding purpose while living with serious disabilities. The road can be extraordinarily difficult, but the shooting does not get to define every part of who Akil is. He was a person before June 21. He remained a person after it. A son, a young man, an aspiring producer, someone with plans, someone with people who care about him, and someone whose story now serves as a reminder of just how fragile ordinary moments can become when anger and weapons collide. Perhaps that is the biggest lesson from this entire case. Most life-changing tragedies do not begin with someone announcing, "Tonight, everything will change." They begin normally. A conversation, a visit, a disagreement. Someone gets irritated. Someone says something. Emotions rise. And then one choice transforms everything. June 21, 2025, reportedly began as an ordinary family visit for Akil Searcy. By the end of that night, he was fighting for his life. He survived, but reports say the shooting left him paralyzed from the neck down. And whatever the full investigation ultimately establishes about every detail surrounding the incident, one truth remains impossible to ignore. A few moments of conflict produced consequences that may last a lifetime. The person who enters an argument is rarely thinking about the hospital room that could come afterward, the rehabilitation, the family grief, the police interviews, the courtroom, the regret, and the permanent disability. But perhaps people should, because sometimes the best way to understand the true cost of violence is not to focus only on the moment someone pulls a trigger. It is to look at everything that happens after. The victim who wakes up to a completely different life, the relatives trying to process what happened, the opportunities that may never return, the questions that may never have satisfying answers, and the realization that the entire tragedy might have been prevented if someone had simply chosen to walk away. So here is the question I want to leave with you. How does something reportedly so minor become serious enough for a young man to lose the life he knew? And more importantly, at what point could this tragedy have been stopped? Because whatever people were arguing about that night, one thing is certain, it could never have been worth this. Akil survived the gunshot. Now comes the much longer story, living with what happened. And sometimes, surviving the moment is only the beginning. This video is created for informational, documentary, and commentary purposes. Details concerning this case may differ between publicly available reports, witness accounts, social media posts, private sources, and later official findings. Some names, photographs, timelines, or identifying details circulating online may be incomplete, disputed, altered, or inaccurate. Nothing presented in this video should be interpreted as a finding of guilt against any individual. Any person accused or charged with an offense should be considered innocent, unless and until proven guilty in accordance with the law. This channel is not affiliated with law enforcement, the courts, attorneys, investigators, or any government agency. We do not encourage violence, harassment, retaliation, or attacks against anyone connected with this case. The purpose of this content is to discuss publicly available information, encourage awareness, and examine the consequences of violence. If additional verified information becomes available, details presented in this story may require correction or clarification.